Hello everyone, welcome back to RotoViz Overtime on RotoViz Radio, brought to you by Blue Wire. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland, and I'm joined by Shawn Siegele. You can find all of Shawn's work up at rotoviz.com. But Shawn, we are back at it again. We're drafting in the Best Ball Mania tree over at underdogfantasy.com, and we are ready to draft. So if you're drafting over at underdogfantasy.com, we have 30 seconds. So this draft does kick off. You can use the code RotoViz while signing up. That gets you a 100% sign-up bonus up to $100 if you're jumping up and playing over there with a new account. We are chasing $2 million, Shawn, as the top prize here in Underdog Fantasy's Best Ball Mania tree. We continue to get some favoritism here, Shawn, with these draft slots. Is that true?
I know. I was just mentioning to Ben, because he and I drafted from the 104 in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament the other day, that he had gotten rid of the curse. You have been bringing nothing but amazing draft slots to me. I drafted later that day after we drafted last week and got the 109, 110 again. I've got an article up on the site breaking down those two hyper fragile drafts. Colm, last time we did hyper fragile, we're sitting here at the 102. Jonathan Taylor has gone. This feels to me, again, from the 101, 102, that hyperfragile will be possible, but maybe we want to at least consider going with an anchor running back draft today.
Yeah, I think so. I think, we went and we did what we had to do, Shawn, the last day, but I think we'll see how it plays out. Funny enough, I think what's going to play out now today is when we've had that discussion of that being a possibility. Maybe we don't get our guys here when it comes back to the 2-3 turn, but we started the last draft. We got Jonathan Taylor at 102, back-to-back draft. Shawn, this is going to break. This good spell of picks is going to break. People talk with Peter Overzet and the Influencer 101 that he was getting. There was people complaining that they weren't going to draft in these anymore because Pete kept getting the 101. It's going to start happening if we keep getting these 102s and getting those good draft spots. But hopefully, Shawn, today we will see some of those wide receivers drop back to us in the back end of the second round into the third round. So I'm looking forward to this draft. But we haven't drafted Christian McCaffrey too many times together this kind of draft season so far. We have gone with Jonathan Taylor when he's been there. We probably have taken McCaffrey a couple of times, but we've gone with some of the wide receivers as well for some zero RB builds. But let's see how it's going to play out. The picks that have gone off the board in the wide receiver position. At the 103, we had Cooper Kupp, then Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. Then we had Austin Eckler, Stephon Diggs, Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, Devontae Adams, CeeDee Lamb. So pretty much going kind of as you would expect so far. So we'll see who's coming back, Shawn. At this point, people probably listening, we've had a couple of the same spot. People probably knowing the targets that we're going to have in that range. My two targets tend to be AJ Brown and T. Higgins. Is there anyone else that we want to discuss over those two guys today? Because they're the two guys we tend to talk about at this point.
Well, Ben talked me into AJ Brown a few picks into the third. That's his favorite player, and a very good player to have as the favorite player. As Ben mentions pretty frequently, he's played in the Tennessee system and hasn't had the number of routes that star wide receivers usually have. If he jumps up to a normal level and then is able to maintain a lot of his peripherals, you're looking at just a stunning type of season. Now, we know that there could be continued concerns on that level when you're looking at the Philadelphia Eagles and how they attacked last year. One of the things that you and I have been playing, and RotoViz, I think, to an extent, has been playing in drafts, is this idea that the Eagles could flip and become a little bit more like the 2021 Baltimore Ravens. Not to say that the Ravens will continue that, but the Eagles could be the team that does that this season with Brown and Devontae Smith to go along with Dallas Goedert. I think here, I just want to see how it plays out. I think that we want to maintain our flexibility. We talked about doing anchor running back approach. I've got several articles up, including and especially in the Dynasty workshop, talking about how maintaining flexibility is really the key. We want to be flexible here. We can kind of see what build works the best as we go along. We know that last year, the double anchor or an RB start was very effective, but that was in part because second round running backs had much more success in 2021 than they usually do. If you've read Michael Dubner's work on the silver bullet approach to best ball, you know that some of the differences that will show up if you look only and more specifically at 2021 compared if you look at the last 4 or 5 years together, that maybe that RB start is a little bit of a false prize there, a false idol, we might say, as we think about what worked last year and how whatever worked in the previous year tends to get chased a little bit. That being said, I think that at the 211, we more or less just want to take the best available player, because we do know that especially once you've started out with Christian McCaffrey, you have a lot of flexibility. And whether it's anchor, zero, obviously it won't be zero at this point, but hyper fragile, the build will flow off of that and will work. So we get here. I think that T. Higgins is more or less a no-brainer. I know he's the guy that you are looking at. Is there any compelling reason to go in a different direction here?
No, I think the question would have been between him and Debo, who went one pick before. People watching on the video may have seen my face squeeze up a little bit when that pick happened. You know, I think he would be interesting there as well. The other player, Shawn, that would have made that interesting would have been if Saquon Barkley had made it. He went at the 208, then Nick Chubb, then Debo Samuel. So if he had got back to us, I think it would have been interesting. The picks between when we selected are now Javonte Williams and Josh Allen. So we're back on the clock. But the options that are available, Shawn, are Mark Andrews, Leonard Fournette, AJ Brown. Then we have Allen, Williams, and DJ Moore. I think for me here, it's AJ Brown.
Well, I've gotten maybe more AJ Brown that I'm really looking for. What are your thoughts on Mark Andrews, who has a 20 ADP? And
we're going to get Mark Andrews. You're really craftily doing this. We're going to time out. This is amazing, Shawn. I cannot believe this. This is the downside of not drafting where I have access to the keys here. I think, Shawn, we do get him at a 6-pick discount. So the other part is I haven't drafted Mark Andrews very much at all this year, because he is generally going in that mid-second round and he's not really peeling back to us. So I do think getting him at the 302 there is an absolute steal. And I did mention some of the players, Shawn, that went in between. Josh Allen went at the 301 there. Another player that caught my eye when he was taken was at the 201. We've seen Michael Pittman go off the board. So we do have some players, and that has pushed other players down. But yeah, man, I love getting AJ Brown, but I think that structurally, I think that could be a sound decision, Shawn, based on the value we got there. I also want to hear your take, because you obviously had no intention of us getting AJ Brown. You mentioned having more AJ Brown than you might want. I have all the AJ Brown at this point. So maybe getting away from him is the way to go at certain points. The other thing that it has given us access to in the drafts that we haven't got Brown is it does give you that ability to look into, Devontae Smith later as well. So was it just a value thing, Shawn, that gave us there? It also gets us access to the elite tight end. And how are you for exposure on Andrews this year? Is he somebody that you haven't been getting much of so far?
It's fairly low, and I have Kyle Pitts ranked ahead of him. Listeners to our last Underdog show know that we did pick Kyle Pitts in that range. But with Andrews falling below ADP, that's where I would be looking to get him. And with how high I have Kyle Pitts ranked, if we just selected Pitts where I have him ranked, he would be on every team. We don't necessarily want that. We want to get decent values, and we want to get a little bit different players as we go through from the draft slots. Now, last time we had Jonathan Taylor, so this would be Christian McCaffrey with Pitts, whereas before it was Jonathan Taylor with Pitts. Depending on how many early picks we get, we've been lucky recently. We could obviously go on a run where we have the 107 to 112 for 10, 15 drafts in a row, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, I wish I had some of those Pitts CMC combinations. But we do want the elite tight end. We know that's a key part of the build. Right now, where we go running back, wide receiver, tight end, we're very well set up to do a large number of things. My concern with AJ Brown is just that I don't think that the gap between him and Devontae Smith is nearly as large of the gap in their ADP. So we're trying to create exposure to players and teams and scenarios. We talk about that Eagles offense blowing up. If it does blow up, if they pass more than people think, that's going to be great for AJ Brown. It's going to be even better for Devontae Smith. And then you're going to wish that you had more of him. It's a cheaper way to play the offense. One of the things that we look at that 2-3 turn in Underdog, where the drafters are taking the wide receivers and perhaps pushing down some of the running backs we don't want, is that means also that we don't get really wide receivers that we want at that range. So it's a huge benefit to have the 102, anything there in the sort of the top 4 or 5 picks. Definitely not complaining about having a pick at the 2-3 turn, because having a pick early in the third also an advantage. And yet in many drafts, there's not a clear-cut player there. When there is, like a Mark Andrews, then I think that we want to get that. The issue with the Eagles, we talked about maybe they could be more pass heavy. Obviously, the big talking point right now with the Ravens, and perhaps one of the reasons why Mark Andrews lasted to us, is that there's this real specter, there's this concern that they could go very, very run heavy. And then even with Andrews being a superstar, perhaps he doesn't score like he did last year. Colm, one of the things that I was a little bit surprised by there is Mark Andrews is perhaps the most important player to RotoViz Overtime. It seems like we should be pretty pumped up to have gotten him.
No, I'm pumped after we did get him, but it's always tough for me to take those eyes off AJ Brown at that particular point. But we were in a really nice situation at that turn, because we almost had an opportunity to go and get Debo as well as a potential player to talk on there. We don't really have time probably at this point to go back and discuss that, but yeah, Mark Andrews, what Shawn was referencing there, and a lot of different leagues, but particularly in our big money league last year in the big money that we won, I guess we'll say, the FFPC Best Ball Tournament, came through strong for us there over those closing weeks. We are now 2 picks away, Shawn. Interesting kind of area of the draft here. We get Ezekiel Elliott, Marquise Brown, Deontay Johnson going off the board, Terry McLaurin, Darren Waller, Patrick Mahomes, Brandon Cooks. So we are 1 pick away, but any players really standing out? We have Gabriel Davis here is probably a top option. DK Metcalf, another receiving option. Then we have some quarterback options, or your guy Breece Hall here is the other name that's probably on our list.
Well, we had talked about doing an anchor running back approach, but there's just such a big disparity in the value at running back versus wide receiver right here, at least to my mind. Breece Hall went at the 204 in the draft I did earlier today. For him to be at the 411, I don't know that we can pass that. Yeah,
no, let's take him. And Shawn is, I think if I'm drafting solo, I'm probably trying to get the wide receiver here. But I think we're in a position where we are going to get our option of either Davis, Metcalf, or Bateman, because there's obviously 2 picks to go before it comes back to us here. Are they the clear second option? I think, Hall is just too much to pass up. And you mentioned as well, the other draft that was an FFPC Best Ball Tournament, but, the difference in ADP is vast. So we have 22 seconds. We're on the clock, Shawn. Who are we taking here?
Well, I was all set to take DK Metcalf, but Gabriel Davis did come through. It's funny to talk about Gabriel Davis at the 502 as being this incredible value, but where he's going in drafts currently, it really is. This is another chance to have a little bit of a unique team here, and he's got just huge upside.
Yeah, so we're basically at the moment, Shawn, we're just auto drafting at the top of the queue for the last, I think that was the last 3 picks. We've just gone with the top option, but that has led us to Mark Andrews, Breece Hall, and Gabriel Davis. I would also have been interested there to get DK Metcalf. Did get a comment, Shawn, on one of the recent videos where it was, I think it was after our first round pick, maybe at the 102, that you added Travis Kelce to the queue at that point. I've noticed you've added DK Metcalf to your queue here. It would be amazing. I do not think they're going to make 24 picks to get back to us, but I got a few funny comments regarding that. People enjoyed seeing him added to the queue.
Yeah, you always want you always want to add your best available players, right?
Just in case. You don't want to mess them. You don't want
to forget they're there, because granted, obviously you're not going to get Travis Kelce, but sometimes you'll go back through a draft. The very last thing that you want to have happen is make some picks and then realize that because you had completely eliminated someone from any possibility of coming back around, make your picks and then realize that a player that you have, not only is their ADP higher, but maybe you have them ranked like 2 or 3 rounds earlier, that you just had completely closed off the possibility in your mind that they could come back around, because it would be so insane for them to do so. And then, not only do you not get that value, but you're kicking yourself because you missed on the pick. I like to fill in the queue here from time to time with those top guys like a DK Metcalf. And then there will be other times, Colm, where we'll leave the queue empty because we're looking at the overall draft board, or we're discussing players that we've picked. Then we have the back and forth where you give me a hard time for either not having filled up the queue, or I did think it was fun in our last show when you mentioned I was refusing to move the guys we were discussing to the top of the queue so that if we did timeout, we would get them. As I like to say, you're allowed to draft with 1 second left. I obviously don't have to be as nervous since I have control of the draft. If you're not the person who has the hand on the mouse, then you're just always wondering, is Shawn actually going to click on someone or not? Colm, one of the reasons why we put the players in the queue, even though they're not coming back around, is that you have the good feeling of seeing their name for that stretch while they are there. That contrasts with what we are currently staring at in terms of best available, where it's David Montgomery, Josh Jacobs, Elijah Mitchell, Chris Godwin, Dalton Schultz, Adam Thielen, Russell Gage. None of these players are options for us.
No, I don't think so. So we're 5 picks away. Ideally, those players would all get picked before it makes its way back to us. We did touch earlier on AJ Brown and then the Devontae Smith situation. Devontae Smith goes in this range, Joe Burrow goes in this range, Drake London goes in this range. I think they're all interesting candidates, and Trey Lance as well. So I think if we come away with Devontae Smith and a quarterback, but Joe Burrow did go off the board with that next pick. But how would you feel if we could get Devontae and Trey Lance here? I think would be the nicest situation that we could get probably.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. Joe Burrow goes at the 606. That is more or less around ADP.
The other thing I was going to say, just in that, Ben, is in terms of adding those players to the queue, it is good also to, from draft to draft to see if you don't take them where those players maybe do slide at times, because ADP is one thing, but seeing individual drafts of where these players go. And we've mentioned, and Sean's mentioned, that we've been fortunate enough the last couple of drafts to get good draft slots. We are going to be drafting, at the 105, 106 at times, and that's also going to help, guide where some of those players might come as well.
It will. And then there's also, for the superstitious, that sense of if you put someone in the queue that you absolutely have to have, that maybe you will jinx yourself, that player won't come back through. Colm, we're not superstitious, but we are very much hoping that Devontae Smith makes it one more spot. Where are you here with Chris Godwin? We have a balanced build. We have Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, T. Higgins, Gabriel Davis, Mark Andrews, a lot of different ways we could go. We're going to take Devontae Smith here, but then there will be 2 picks and it comes back. If Godwin comes back to us, do you like him? DeAndre Hopkins also in this particular range. In a couple of drafts in the past several days, I have taken those players in hyper-fragile builds in order to get the late season upside at the wide receiver position and hoping to balance that out a little bit with the extreme depth. If I'm drafting 9, if I'm drafting 10 wide receivers, perhaps that part of it ends up working. You have a little bit of coverage just in terms of pure volume. Now, we know the volume is weaker because you started with a hyper-fragile approach, and so you don't have the absolute stars who are going to score for you. So you have to deal with a little bit of that tension. Some advantages, some disadvantages, obvious trade-offs there. We're now 1 pick away as Allen Lazard goes 6-12. Dalton Schultz goes. Godwin and Hopkins, the top 2 guys on the board, and then Drake London. London is the player that we usually go with. Godwin is well below ADP. How do you feel?
I think Lance is the guy to go for. I think Godwin below ADP is a good value there, but I'm just staying away from Godwin at the moment.
So you want us to take Lance here?
Yeah, I think we get the 2 quarterbacks, at least 1 quarterback in the window. The upside is through the roof. I think Godwin there is that's the first time in a draft recently where I've been very, very tempted by it. That is 10 picks after ADP. It's now 11 picks after ADP. The next person takes Miles Sanders. I think that at this point, this is where, it makes sense to take him when it's around below ADP. I just have some concerns of recovery from injuries. Chris Godwin, for people, longtime listeners of RotoViz Overtime, will know that he is one of our absolute favorite wide receivers in the entire NFL. But coming back from that injury, I just have some concerns. And the argument that you made, I think we took Hopkins in that last draft of like having that late season hammer to go in there in the playoffs. But yeah, just have that little bit of concern around the injury in my mind, which I'm finding a little bit hard to shake off. But today, that was almost the time, Shawn, to go for it. And I do think if Lance hadn't have been there, Lance was the only other pick that I was tempted to go with at that point. I think if it was just the 2 wide receivers, I would have took a shot there on Godwin and this particular draft being around after ADP. Were you very close to going for him or Hopkins over Lance? It felt like you might have been.
Yeah, I think I would have been pretty tempted with Godwin there, although what looks like a value now may not look like a value in 2 or 3 weeks. Godwin has been overdrafted through most of the offseason when you look at what he's liable to contribute in 2022, especially in the first half. Now, it's easy to say, okay, well, but what you really wanted those points during the fantasy playoffs, but you have to get there first. And that part of it for me means that it's just difficult to draft him in that area. Now, we say difficult to draft him in that area. The 3 wide receivers who went immediately in front of him are Allen Lazard, Christian Kirk, and Kadarius Toney.
I would draft him all over all of. Well, maybe Toney gets in, but I think he should go ahead of all those guys. He should,
And even DeAndre Hopkins, who goes in the pick afterward. With Hopkins, you're going to lose the first 6 weeks, but then he should come back and be completely ready, or one would hope that he is ready. Godwin, could be very limited through most of the season. I think once you get into training camp and players are not actually practicing, even though we've known the whole way along that was what it's going to be, you start to see some of these prices get back to where they should be. My concern with Lance, and I love Lance, I have him on every league. I have him in almost every league, is number one, that it's I don't want to get to where I feel like I have just an absurd 70-80% of Trey Lance. I also don't necessarily want to contribute to his price rising at the 702. It feels a little bit steep, even though we actually are projecting him to outscore that level. We think that it's very easy for him to get ahead of Joe Burrow, easy for him to get ahead of Jalen Hurts, and maybe even more than them. I think it's very possible for him to outscore Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert, who are going much, much earlier. So from that perspective, we like it, but I do want to try and also get the value on him. But one of the things about having the 102 is that you can't draft him at the 710. You can't draft him at the 803 because that is not where you're positioned in the draft. And we were in a little bit of a flat spot. After we selected Devontae Smith, we did not have another player who was rated nearly that highly. And you can see some of the names coming off the board like Tony Pollard, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Damian Harris. Again, love Tony Pollard, but that's a little bit of a stiff price. Damian Harris, is he going to be the highest scoring Patriots back? He's a good player in what I do expect to be a high scoring offense, but you can tell that this is a flat area. Now, TJ Hawkinson was a great pick there. I was hoping he would come back around. Column of the players we are going to have a shot at. What are you thinking here? Matthew Stafford, Treylon Burks, Chase Edmonds. You mentioned getting the second QB in the window. After Stafford is Derek Carr. Again, these are going to be tricky prices. This might be a Justin Fields team in terms of what we're targeting. At wide receiver, do you like Burks? Are you looking for a Chase Claypool? The receiver value in this draft obviously has not been extreme. Drafters are eliminating a lot of those players.
Yeah, I'm thinking here, the rookies, Treylon Burks and Skye Moore as potential options. I'm not interested in Michael Thomas. That might work out against me, but I think we should go Burks here as we're on the clock. But are you like me? Like, I might miss out on Michael Thomas having a great season this year, but I'm sitting out. I'm not. I'll miss it, I think, is the way if it does happen. The players, Shawn, that I'd be interested in would be, and he goes off the board, Devin Singletary, so ignore that. But Skye Moore would be an option if you wanted to go running back, which I probably don't want to go at this point. Hunt is there, but I think I would go Skye Moore here, unless you want to go Derek Carr, but I think I would rather get the wide receiver.
Would you prefer to have Garrett Wilson?
I think I would wait and see if he might slip through. I don't think he will slip through, but I think based on ADP, I would go with Moore.
Okay, so we select Skye Moore, the 9th round. Not a bad price on Skye. He has a chance to blow up and be the easy wide receiver 1 for the Chiefs. I think that Marquez Valdes-Scantling is the cleanest and safest receiver on the Chiefs relative to ADP, but I also don't think that he's a guy who is likely to emerge as a pure league winner. Now, I think he's going to have multiple long touchdowns. I think he's going to have a good season. But when we're looking at either Juju or Skye Moore to even flirt with Travis Kelce types of target share numbers, when we're looking at a guy who could be Patrick Mahomes' main target in the final third of the season, I think it's going to be Juju sort of having a career renaissance, or it's going to be this rookie who was a cult favorite even before the Chiefs draft him, but then he gets in this situation with Patrick Mahomes, and suddenly, he's vastly overdrafted by where he was selected in the reality draft. You think of the number of players who were selected ahead of him who are going much, much later, and yet because he's with Patrick Mahomes, because it's such a good situation, because he had not a bulletproof, but a very good prospect profile there. He's got plus athleticism. He's that player who can be not only the possession receiver, but have some run after the catch skills. I think the enthusiasm is warranted. And I do think because he had the hamstring injury during offseason workouts, that has kept his ADP in a range where you can actually select him some. If that hadn't happened, if we had gotten Skye Moore buzz during OTAs, you would not be seeing him there in the 9th round, even if that was the appropriate price. And so I think because of that, we can still take some shares of him. And again, Colm, it was a little bit of a flat area. Otherwise, I think that Garrett Wilson is probably the pick, but because of the way that he's priced, you have to take a little bit of risk there. What are your thoughts on Robert Woods, who's the top player available here as we get into the mid-9th round? After Moore, Dallas Goedert, Michael Thomas, James Cook, Ken Walker, Ramondre Stevenson, Kareem Hunt. So a mini running back run, and then Chase Claypool, Derek Carr does come off the board. Woods, Dawson Knox, Zach Ertz, some of the top players by ADP. I don't think these guys are necessarily going to be our targets, but do you have interest in Robert Woods? Is he going to be someone who actually cuts in and takes the number one wide receiver role away from the player we've already drafted in Treylon Burks?
Hopefully not. But I do think that Robert Woods is a very good NFL player. Again, coming back off an injury as a veteran player is never a sure thing. Reports seem to be quite positive with him. I'm just targeting, those guys. I think with the higher upside, and changing offense at that age is a little bit of a concern. Into a situation where we talked about, AJ Brown and his target profile, and then we're moving into taking Robert Woods out of the Rams to put into the Titans offense. I don't see him outperforming what he did with LA, but there is going to be a certain point here where, at the moment we are 7 picks past ADP. I think he could become interesting, but he feels to me like he slides into that Adam Thielen category of, Michael Thomas as well, where I'm just probably not going to have him that much. I still have some shares of Robert Woods, who is proven quite hard to move in those dynasty streets. So hopefully for those teams, he'll pull it through. But if he lasts back here, I think he's somebody that we would have to consider, but I don't think he's going to last. The disappointing news, Shawn, was in back-to-back picks, Garrett Wilson and Rondale Moore both went off the board. So they did not make it back to us. They went, 7 picks after, which is right around ADP or just above it, but we'll see how it plays out. The last round since we took Skye Moore, then it's Dallas Goedert, Michael Thomas, James Cook, Ken Walker, Ramondre Stevenson, Kareem Hunt, Chase Claypool, Derek Carr, Garrett Wilson, Rondale Moore, Melvin Gordon, Cordarrelle Patterson, Tyler Boyd, Robert Woods, who we were just touching on there, and then Dawson Knox. So, Shawn, we're 5 picks away, but are you feeling similar to Robert Woods, or are you tempted in some builds to add him into those rosters?
Well, I did have a team in the last week where I selected both Burks, Woods, and Ryan Tannehill in a super flex draft. And Tannehill was obviously the discount bargain play at QB, and then led into a situation where, because both of the wide receivers fell below as well, I thought that makes sense if you're going to be in a super flex format and take the risk on Tannehill. Tannehill's someone I think not wildly undervalued or anything like that, but probably underrated from a reality perspective. I think he could have a good bounce back season, especially if he does get his weapons. And, if we're banking on Treylon Burks having the type of season that makes him worth selecting so often, then Ryan Tannehill probably not a bad late pick, not one of those QBs in the window. You said around ADP for Rondale Moore, but he goes at the 108. His ADP is 120. We were hoping to get him. We have the 119th pick, so that is a disappointment. But that kind of thing obviously happens. Again, the drafter in that area, if they wanted more, they were going to have to take him, wouldn't have come back to them at the following turn. So, Colm, we're now in this situation again where the top quarterback is Justin Fields. He's a perfect fit for what we're trying to do, a good match with Trey Lance. We have a lot of him. There are some later QB options, but is he the direction you want to go? Rondell Moore, an earlier ADP, but he's falling like a stone in some drafts.
Yeah, I think we take Fields here. We lock in the 2 quarterback build, and then we see what comes back to us here in 2 picks time. We do have some interesting options. Cole Kmet, who you have in the queue, but we also have Jones, White, and Spiller. I'm not really too worried. I'm going to buy the dip on Ronald Jones. A bit like the opposite, Shawn, of the Michael Thomas thing. If Ronald Jones doesn't happen, I'm probably going to get sunk with that cost. So we're going to go, down with the ship on a couple of things, I think. But yeah, Ronald Jones, Rashad White. I'm happy to draft either of those guys, I think, as a running back option. Landry and Jameson Williams would probably be the wide receiver targets that we would take here if we wanted to. The other one is Jamison Crowder for the Buffalo Bills. Could correlate as well into the Week 17 game with the Bengals, but happy, ready to go whichever direction you want to go here.
Yeah, I think that Ronald Jones is probably the play, but I'd also be fine with Rashad White, would be fine with Isaiah Spiller. We do go ahead and time out, but unlike in some of the situations that Colm has referenced, I did put Jones there, so he would be our pick.
That was a very calm one, Shawn. That was much more relaxed. I was happy with any of the running back options that you went with there. And the wide receivers that I mentioned, again, we're not looking to just let all these players fall down and slide, but I'm hoping that some of those options are going to make their way back to us here with the wide receivers. So far, Shawn, that gives us a 2-3-5-1 build. Trey Lance, Justin Fields at quarterback, Mark Andrews at tight end, Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Ronald Jones at running back, and then T. Higgins, Gabriel Davis, Devontae Smith, Treylon Burks, and Skye Moore. So we had Gabriel Davis. I did mention the possibility to get somebody like a Jamison Crowder. Obviously, that would be the same offense, but there's options there. Jarvis Landry may be an option that's available. So we have some interesting options, Shawn, coming up here. We obviously can try and see if we can get KJ Hamler into the mix as well to get into some of those Week 17 correlations. But I'm pretty happy with how things are playing out for us here so far through those opening 11 picks or so. How are you feeling? I know people are going to look at this roster and say it's not balanced because we have more wide receivers than running backs, but I think overall for where we're at and where we're looking to go, I think we're pretty balanced for our approach.
Yeah, and really, especially if you have those 2 running backs early, the very last thing you want is actually to be balanced. You need to be very wide receiver heavy outside of those picks.
That's why I said balance for our approach, which I just want all the wide receivers.
Colm wants all the wide receivers. We've done a good job at getting him completely on board to where it is like pulling teeth to get him to select a running back. That's absolutely the direction that we're going here. It'll be interesting to see as we come back through, and we'll show kind of the board instead of our queue at this point. Rashad White goes late in the 11th. A couple picks later, Isaiah Spiller. Those were not realistic picks to come back, but they would have been fun additional running back options. We see Trevor Lawrence go. Tua is still out there in this draft, and he is arguably someone who fits in the QB window by ADP, but that's not the way that I would look at that.
How are you feeling? For me, a lot of the time in these drafts, Justin Fields is the target, and he is the one I'm hoping to get. And him and Tua generally go sometimes together, but in this draft, for example, you're going to get almost a 2-round discount on Tua. But I'm going and trying to get Fields, but I think sometimes maybe I should be willing to go and try and get Tua. The problem is if you pass on Fields to get Tua and you miss Tua, then you're really into a 3 quarterback build at that particular point. But we're looking at the ADPs, and we have Justin Fields we're thinking is going to rush for a lot of these points. But if we look then at Tua, he has can rush for some of them as well, but also has Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle going in the opening 3 rounds of the draft.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to take Tua if you don't have either Jalen Waddle or Tyreek Hill, and even then, it's much more of a tenuous pick than someone like Justin Fields when you're looking at both full season and weekly upside. That doesn't mean that that'll be the way that it actually plays out. Whoever does take Tua at this point, especially if it's the Hill or Waddle drafter, I think will be very, very excited to have gotten that discount. The Dolphins are a team that I'm excited to see. And it's not just those two guys. Mike Gesicki, also one of the most athletic tight ends in NFL. I think the addition of Hill will free him up, going to score quite a few points. So from that perspective, it'll be a good pick. He continues to last as Devontae Parker, Jarvis Landry, Albert O go off the board. Cole Kmet, who was sort of my target as the tight end 2 for us, and have a little bit of that connection with Justin Fields. One of the reasons why Fields is going so late is that drafters don't think that he has any weapons, but I think that's going to push a very large number of targets to Kmet this season. He, in a vacuum, I think, is being underdrafted. The player who's lasted a long time below
Has something
ADP
happened to Pat
here,
Fairmouth? No?
I think that there's just concern about the quarterback play.
Oh,
And so
no,
we get back around
that has to be the pick.
for Freiermuth.
Yeah, I think it has to be. At this particular point, he's going 17 picks after ADP and would fit perfectly into a 2 tight end build. We were just looking at some of that, Evan Ingram went ahead of him, and we both love Albert Okwuegbunam. He goes ahead of him. I was shocked that Fairmouth lasted back. He was somebody who for all the joking, he was in the queue when we made our last pick. So I think that's a really nice. And the other player that I really wanted to get here was Jameson Williams. I don't know how you feel about that, but he would be the guy that I would be looking to add in here. It gets us, I know it's just feels, but the Detroit Bears game would have some correlation there in week 17.
So you're feeling more confident in the rookie coming back, and not necessarily more confident in the rookie coming back, but knowing that there are a wide range of outcomes in terms of how these injuries will play out for players who did suffer the injury toward the end of last season, not the beginning of last season.
I'm concerned about Williams coming back and being healthy, but I'm also getting him in the 13th round versus, where we would be looking to try and get the situation with Godwin. The other part that would bump that for me a little bit is the week 17. And I've mentioned this before, I have too much exposure to this Bears-Lions game, but most of the time that is true. TJ Hawkinson on the Lions side of things. So I think that the concern is real for him recovering from that injury. But you talked about, DeAndre Hopkins is that late season guy. And I just think the discount that you can get on somebody like Williams, and I know it's injury versus suspension related, but I'm willing to take the risk in the 13th round to that upside. I think the rookies are still undervalued. It'll depend on his injury, how his ADP does, but yeah, I think I'm willing to take the risk there.
And the thing that you point out, the price creates a very different conversation when we're thinking about what the risk reward is. How does it potentially impact the lineup? What do we need out of him, and what times of the season do we need out of him? I think that if there's a player in this draft who ends up being a Justin Jefferson type of guy, it's probably Jameson Williams, with his combination of elite production last season and that speed to be able to get open at all levels at any time, create the big play. One of the things we saw from Jamar Chase last year, and in some ways maybe the similarity is closer there, to where Jamar Chase, someone very difficult to cover because he can get open at all levels, but receivers who can go over the top and create multiple 60-yard touchdowns during the course of a season. The threat to the defense, the stress to a defense is so severe, it makes it very difficult to deal with. Now, one of the reasons that Chase was not more expensive last season, beyond the little drops issue that he had that probably knocked down his ADP, say foolishly, I don't mean that in a disrespectful way to any drafters, but just that probably didn't make sense. But yet the fact that T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd were both on the team and that Joe Burrow was rehabbing an injury, those were all contextual concerns. For Jameson Williams, he has Jared Goff, but then also the potential competition, even once he does return. And the Lions have said that it could be a problem. It could be a problem incorporating him into the offense because you have DJ Chark, because you have Amon-Ra St. Brown, TJ Hawkinson, even DeAndre Swift as a potentially elite receiving back. Maybe it's really more of a 2023 play, but I'm with you in the 13th round. I don't know, Colm. I'm a big Lions fan. It's kind of a fun pick. I'm not going to.
The other thing with something like this is, like, we can talk about it could very well be difficult to get him back in if all the other things are working perfectly. But realistically, if he comes back in week 7, for example, there's a good chance that somebody else is unfortunately hurt, banged up, out for the rest of the season on IR, for example. These things happen, so we'll see how it plays out. But yeah, I'm looking to get the upside on the rookies here and take those shots. But we'll see. The value is the main difference there for me. Shawn, we are 8 picks away. We are, I think, building out quite a fantastic roster here at the moment. 2 quarterbacks, 2 tight ends. I know you have Gerald Everett and Noah Fant, who it's our obligation. They we have a contract situation. They have to be added to the queue in every single draft, and we probably will take them if they are there. But looks like a 2 quarterback, 2 tight end build, and then filling out the other positions unless Everett or Fant become options. Who would be some of your priority targets here in 7 picks if all things fall correctly? We are at 160 by pick. Some of the players that are in the queue are Everett, Tyrion Davis-Price, and Noah Fant, who go in this range. A little bit later than that, in general, we would see KJ Hamler then. But George Pickens is an option, somebody I haven't drafted a lot of. Who are you hoping to get here in 6 picks?
I think maybe Gerald Everett. I just think that having the potential for 3 elite tight ends does give you an advantage. You look at the roster construction explorer, and it really likes 3 tight ends in a variety of builds and at a variety of price levels. So even if you do select that tight end early, you pull up the Win the Flex tool and you put in half PPR, you look at Underdog ADP and sort of the implied points by ADP, looking at the different positions. The tight ends are competitive down there in this price range, which suggests that they're not disastrous picks. In terms of filling the flex, all of those things come into play. I think we want to take the best available player. I don't necessarily like the prices on any of the running backs in this range. Tyrion Davis-Price would be an option. One of the things that we do in terms of moving through here in our particular league is that selecting Gerald Everett doesn't allow one of the other drafters in our league to take him. This is a little bit of a consideration. Also an element where I think if we look to, how do we win the $1 million for winning the regular season, that having Gerald Everett always a potential trump card, as he's a guy I think is going to end up on a lot of the teams that are in that top 50, top 100, 200, even 500 out of the 450,000 entries in the contest. Do you have another guy? I mean, there are going to be lots of running back options late, but I don't know that anyone in this range. I mean, Marlon Mack with an ADP of 172, but even then it's a little bit more of a floor play. Anybody that we take outside of Davis-Price is going to be a fairly large reach at this juncture.
Yeah, for anyone watching in too, they might have thought I was nodding my head to no, but I was cracking my neck for anyone watching the video element. But Shawn, he has now dropped, 12 picks below ADP at this point, and it's a real flat spot here. You mentioned, we'll talk about it as we go along, there's a lot of wide receivers, a lot of running back options that we like here. We even joked on a recent draft where we said that those players that were going undrafted, that we were like, we wished we could have drafted all those guys. So yeah, I think we leave our priorities open. It is a question I'll put to you. If it was a case that we knew that we could get Everett there, would you skip on Fairmouth? I think both of those tight ends, and actually Andrews, when we come to think about it, we've got all them at between a 6 and kind of 12 pick ADP slide, which I think is going to build out a unique roster here as well.
Yeah, just to get such crazy ADP values on a couple of those guys. And if Tyrion Davis-Price makes it through the drafter here at the 1501, we'll get a more than a round discount on him as well. Now, that's not nearly as big a deal when you're talking about round 15, but it still is something. And the other players available here, just are not particularly interesting. I mean, the top wide receivers on the board, Marvin Jones just went, Corey Davis, Alec Pierce, George Pickens. I do like Paris Campbell there, but Kendrick Bourne, then we're quite a bit later with KJ Hamler and Will Fuller.
No, it's TDP here, I think, is the pick. I think sometimes Shawn drafts, when you're doing them, it feels like every pick you want to make, it's, just you're losing that pick every single time. But in this draft, it feels like we're getting players sliding down boards. That's why I asked. I actually Googled Pat Fairmouth when that pick came up, because I was like, what has happened? What news has broke? Because just that, I think just the value is too much there. Players that you would like to get on your roster, and then they're sliding to you. So I'm really liking how this draft is playing out. And when we look through some of the rosters as it comes up at the top of the screen, how teams are built, there's a lot of 5 running back, 5 wide receiver builds at this particular point in the draft. Looking through the next 2 teams up, I've seen a couple of teams previously that showed that. So we see the team that's coming up here at the 10th pick. It's a 4 running back, 4 wide receiver, 4 tight end build. So we'll review those a little bit more maybe after to see how it looks. But so far, Shawn, I think it's worked out perfectly for us in this draft. And those teams that currently have 1 tight end, unless they are of the elite category, I think that's going to put them in a little bit of a hole, trying to get somebody to fill in the back end of their roster here. But yeah, we're in a really nice position now where we just take what really comes. And I think sometimes that's when the drafts really set up for you, when it isn't the case that you have to force in that wide receiver, force in that running back. You can just see how it plays out over the course of these rounds. And yeah, some of our favorite targets are coming up here to really solidify this roster.
Exactly. There are so many wide receiver and running back options remaining. We did reach about a half a round on both Trey Lance and Justin Fields, but other than that, we've been getting fantastic value, more than balancing that out. Breece Hall, 5 picks below ADP. Gabriel Davis, 6 picks below ADP. Jameson Williams, around below ADP. Tyrion Davis Price, around and a half. And then you look at the tight ends, all 3 of them. I mean, Mark Andrews, 6 picks below for a player with an ADP of 20 is pretty crazy. But then even bigger gaps for Pat Freiermuth, 16 picks below. Gerald Everett, 13 picks below. A lot of values there. And so I feel a little bit more comfortable with the prices we did have to pay up with at QB.
And the QB one's in a really flat spot. That's why I don't mind doing it there as much. And it also gives you access to so many other options to get those 2 guys on your roster. I think I'm really pleased. So we're 5 picks away here, Shawn, as we wrap back around. But yeah, at this point, I'm just wondering who else is going to be that slide back to us to continue to build out this super team.
And possibilities would include guys like Will Fuller, Wan'Dale Robinson, David Bell. Those are the top players in our queue at wide receiver at the moment. The top of the running back board, I don't know if it's that exciting. Jerick McKinnon would be a possibility, although I don't know that we need him with Rojo. Chris Evans has an ADP below this point, but we know that he can go at any time. A very trendy player whom we also like. Guys like Sony Michel, Hassan Haskins, to Ernest Johnson. Who are you hoping to select here, knowing that we have 3 picks remaining?
Wendell. he's the hope for me. We have Will Fuller after going off the board. Then Uzama goes off the board. So we're down to 2 picks, Shawn, but I don't know. It feels like we may miss out here on him. Well, Mark Ingram goes off the board. We're down to 1 pick. Is he the clear pick here for you?
I think probably so. He's got that week 9 bye that makes it tricky late in drafts sometimes, because it's very easy to get to where you have so many week 9 buys by this point in the draft. Colm, at this point, we have 0 receivers with that week 9 bye. He does make it to this point. He's one of our favorite guys. He's a perfect fit in this build. We need to get up with at least 1 more wide receiver. He the guy? He
is the guy. What's funny here is we're drafting all these guys, Shawn. We touched on it earlier in the show when we talked about, having too many of certain players. And I have to imagine between the rosters you're drafting and the rosters I'm drafting, there's a lot of Wendell Robinson on those rosters.
Now, our last 4 wide receiver selections, all rookies. Does that give you any pause?
No, I think, again, I've talked about that. I think those are players who they're all going to increase in value in the preseason here. Some of them may not, I could be wrong, but I think this is the time to draft them. I think those prices are going to disappear pretty quickly. I also think depending on how we want to finish this out, but there's going to be some veteran options towards the end of this, maybe to slide in there. But my question is, does that give you concern? So we were drafting some of these teams before the NFL draft. So in this one, we have Breece Hall, we have Terry and Davis Price, obviously. We have the 2 second-year quarterbacks in the roster. We have, T. Higgins and Gabriel Davis. We have a lot of young players, but we also have, as you mentioned, 4 rookie wide receivers as well. So you asked me, does it concern me? I said, not overly. Is it a concern to you?
Yes and no. I think that we want to be aware of what we're doing at the wide receiver position with regards to experience, not getting too overweight with the rookies. And at the same time, you do need to take the best players. I think they're going to get more expensive. David Bell or Chris Evans here?
Chris Evans. That was the most relaxed discussion of being on the clock with 6 seconds left I think we've ever had. Well, I didn't even realize we were on the clock.
If I had used 4 more seconds, then I would have been in trouble. So I left you with 5 full seconds to make the decision. You do take Chris Evans. We love that pick. We know that the running back 2...
Was that your way to tell me, when you were saying about, was I concerned about the rookies that we had just drafted? Was that the way of saying, don't draft David Bell here subliminally?
Well, I did kind of hint in that direction, but it's David Bell. And we're talking about probably the 2nd or 3rd best wide receiver in this entire draft class. He fell to number 9 with the Cleveland Browns. They claimed that their analytics staff absolutely loved him, and or their coaching staff believed that he was the guy who would make it to them, but who would eventually be a star. Colm, if you've watched him play, there are some concerns about his separation, even at the collegiate level. But when you draw targets like David Bell, when you catch through contact, we don't do a ton of scouting takes necessarily on the show, but David Bell is so fun to watch when you're trying to figure out, well, this wide receiver who's putting up 4-6 plus times in the 40, how is he such a star at Purdue? You watch him, the hand strength, the ability to catch through contact. One of the things to keep in mind, and one of the things that I think that gets buried from time to time, is that the combination of talent and skill, those really 2 very different things, but the way that they interact creates the player, right? Creates the overall ability level and the ability to impact a game, do the types of things that receivers need to do in order to be relevant on the football field. That can manifest in a variety of different ways. All receivers do not need to be the same. David Bell was a star in college. We know that the main thing that allows people to transition effectively from college to the NFL is being a big-time producer at the college level. I think that you have to love that. Now, he may get Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett had a passable season when he had to fill in for Andrew Luck with the Indianapolis Colts, but definitely not going to be the quarterback that any fantasy manager wants to have hooked up with the receiver. So I guess I'm not surprised that David Bell is lasting a little bit later in drafts now than he was recently. Also, he did start the training camp on the PUP, not expected to be a big deal, but once you get into draft territory, players who are not currently available are going to start falling, at least in the interim. He could come back to us even at the 18-11. We now are in a situation where we have 7 wide receivers. We have 5 running backs. We have 1 less position than we do in some builds because we did take that 3rd tight end. Colm, do you have a clear preference in terms of the direction you want to go?
I don't have a clear preference at the moment. We are only 4 picks away. Can you put up the wide receiver queue just to show, or the wide receiver options just to show me the entire board?
No,
Scroll down.
It's basically almost like I don't like any of those guys. Scroll down. Oh, we have LaVisca in here. We also know.
Still concerns with him. What about somebody like Sterling Shepard? Any concerns? Like, I think there's still some upside there in somebody like a Sterling Shepard. But based on the rookie talk earlier, I'm wondering if we should be looking to add some, veteran presence into this wide receiver room, or should we? The other option is to go for a running back. But I think with the running backs we have, maybe one more running back's the way to go. The thing that has my mind thinking is the wide receiver comment.
Yeah, well, you have done some good shows with Connor O'Driscoll. Everybody should check those out. One of the shows that you guys did was whether or not underdog drafters are drafting enough running backs. I actually did regret not taking a running back in our last draft. That was the hyper fragile. You and I debated that. I think this has to be David Bell or Benjamin. And when you pull up the roster construction explorer, the thing that you do see is that while this particular build, and when I say this particular build, I have running back 2 before 5. Obviously, we took Christian McCaffrey in round 1 and then Breece Hall in round 4. But then the third running back after the 9th round, both the playoff advance rates, the semifinal advance rates are very good. The final advance rates, again, are going to be kind of all over the place looking at just one season here, but they do get better as you have more running backs. So getting up to 6th is better. It's also a little bit higher scoring regular season build. So I think getting the 6th running back in this instance probably did make sense. And we passed on some of those guys last time around, Colm. I do think that Benjamin is someone that you want to have on almost every team. Yeah,
well, I think getting some of the shots if you're into the second last pick is definitely a positive way to go. The pause for concern for me, Shawn, there was when you mentioned about the situation, obviously, with trying to decide what we were going to do with the rookie wide receiver. So that was what gave me a real pause for concern, was trying to see if the rookies were going to be of concern. But Shawn, I think if the rookies don't perform, that the team doesn't perform. I think we have enough top end depth on this roster as well at wide receiver to see how that plays out. But looking back at the full roster, Shawn, we have Trey Lance, Justin Fields, then we have Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Ronald Jones, Tyrion Davis-Price, Chris Evans, Benjamin added in. And I do think in Benjamin, when you're looking at the big gaps in ADP between the likes of him and James Conner and the other running backs that are on that roster, I think it's definitely worth the opportunity at the second to last pick. T. Higgins, Gabriel Davis on the roster, Devontae Smith, Treylon Burks, Skye Moore, Jameson Williams, Wan'Dale Robinson, and then we obviously have the 3 tight ends as well that we took in Mark Andrews, Pat Fairmouth, and then Gerald Everett. So I'm pretty happy with how it played out, Shawn, overall. How are you feeling after the draft has played out, outside of doubting our rookie wide receiver depth?
Well, it's not doubting, more just making sure that we are aware of how that's going. I think that the rookies, because they have such great prices and the upside and what we've seen the last several years, the impact that they can make is so extreme. Wan'Dale is somebody I think that you want to have almost all rosters. I would be surprised if he's not the wide receiver 1 for the Giants. And I say that within the context of thinking that Kenny Golladay and Kadarius Toney will probably have pretty solid seasons. You had mentioned Sterling Shepard. He's coming off of an injury that I think probably disqualifies him. But again, as you get down to the end of the season and whether or not he could go in and cannibalize the points at a key moment, that's something that we definitely would have to be aware of. Colm, this build is a lot of fun, right? It has early round running back firepower, which especially in half PPR formats is going to be potentially important. We're not going to see the massive performances from 0 RB candidates every season in the fantasy playoffs, even though we would love for that to be the case. If you have McCaffrey and Hall, I think you have the chance to have guys who finish number 1 and then maybe number 5 overall. You get to play that Bengals Bills game without it being extraordinarily expensive. Having Gabriel Davis fall here was nice for us. So the Higgins Davis portion of that. And one of the things that I do like, I know that there is so much focus on trying to play them with their quarterbacks playing all of that game together very heavily. I like the fans that we have Trey Lance and Justin Fields instead. if we go into that game and those are the two players that blow up, but then separate from that, we have other things in that game that knock players down. If Stephon Diggs doesn't have a big game, if Jamar Chase doesn't have a big game, I mean, there are definitely scenarios where Josh Allen and Joe Burrow would not be the quarterbacks that you need. One of the things that we do like to mention from time to time, it's not that you have to do it, but Trey Lance, Justin Fields, not only do they have that extreme upside, but they give you a little bit more flexibility in terms of the players that you play with them. You don't have to stack them with the receivers. One of the fun things that does come up here, though, within this context, and having Gabriel Davis, and I say all the time, I think Gabriel Davis is valued above anything that his profile says should be the case. And yet, despite that, he looks like he could be a big-time star if he comes through and has that type of impact. The Week 16 games, also a big deal. You want to be in that group that makes it to the final so that then either Trey Lance or Justin Fields could be the guy with you there. For it to be a situation where you have Buffalo and Chicago in Week 16, I think that part of it is a lot of fun. We want the Bears to be kind of chasing and for Justin Fields to be able to put up a couple of touchdowns, maybe 100 rushing yards. I'm probably more enthusiastic about his rushing potential than the community, and not like wildly so, but I do think that that's something that he could add a little bit more than is being expected. You look at this particular team, and it's a wide range of outcomes team. That I think is important. And then again, we get those values on the tight ends. We should be the highest scoring team from a tight end perspective in this league. And Colm, if you have that, and you have shots with players like Chris Evans and Eno Benjamin late, this may be one of my favorite teams that we've drafted so far.
Yeah, I love this team. The thing, if you look through, like, Christian McCaffrey and Breece Hall there, and then I know Ronald Jones is not going to fit into a hyper fragile build, but I think having Christian McCaffrey and Breece Hall are two of our absolute favorite targets, and those, opening 5 rounds at the running back position. The only way I think that gets better is if we get Jonathan Taylor along with Breece Hall. But Christian McCaffrey is if we look at who can be a legendary running back this season, as Pat Crane would say, he's definitely in that mold. I think having those guys allows you to not maybe have the full depth, but the guys that we have in there have humongous upside as well. And then the wide receivers outside of them being rookies is the only question mark I suppose we would have. But we are trying to target the young players, trying to target rookies, second-year players, and have that upside as well. And we've seen what rookies can do. They're not all going to be Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, but even the guys that didn't have those obviously amazing seasons still had extremely strong years, the likes of a Jalen Waddle, for example, as well. So we are drafting those guys. We're going to continue to draft them. But Shawn, I really like this roster. Hopefully people have liked listening in. That is going to do it for this episode of the show. Again, if you are playing over at UnderdogFantasy.com, use the code RotoViz, get a 100% sign-up bonus up to $100 while registering. You can also get yourself a 10% discount of a RotoViz NFL pass if you use the code RVRadio2022 at checkout at RotoViz.com. Get yourself an NFL pass, get access to all of our content and tools up on the website. And once again, that promo code is RVRadio2022. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out all his work up at rotoviz.com. And until we're back with another show, have a good one.